Hey guys, tonight we're going to drift back in time, not to a world of dates and dry facts, but to a world of real people, of ambition and absurdity. We're going to tell the story of a man whose name you know, Gaius Julius Caesar. But we'll get to know him not as a statue, but as a person. A person who was, it turns out, a bit of a drama queen. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a soft hum. If this helps you unwind, please like and subscribe. And if you're awake enough, feel free to share where you're listening from and what time it is in the comments. Our story begins not in a marble hall in Rome, but on the water, the gentle turquoise water of the Aegean Sea. It is around the year 75 BCE. A young Roman aristocrat is on this ship, on his way to the island of Rhodes. He is in his mid-20s, and his name is Gaius Julius Caesar. He's not yet the Caesar we think of. He's just an ambitious young man from a good family, heading off to study public speaking with a famous teacher. Basically, an ancient Roman version of taking a masterclass to polish his personal brand. He's a man of contradictions, even then. Tall and slim, with piercing dark eyes that seem to see right through you. He was known for being a bit of a dandy, wearing his tunic with long, fringed sleeves and slinging his belt low on his hips. A fashion choice that scandalized the more conservative old men back in Rome. He was also notoriously vain, already worrying about his thinning hair. But beneath the fashionable exterior was a mind like a steel trap and an ambition that burned like a furnace. He had already survived a terrifying brush with the dictator Sulla, who had put his name on a death list. Caesar had gone into hiding, moving from house to house in the swampy back streets of Rome, even catching malaria in the process. He had faced down the most powerful man in Rome and walked away, a teenager who refused to be broken. That experience had left him with a certain fearlessness, a kind of reckless confidence that bordered on arrogance. The journey to Rhodes is peaceful, sleepy even. The world feels calm and endless. The sun glints off the water, a million tiny diamonds of light. The sky is a vast cloudless blue. It's the kind of day that feels like it could go on forever. And then, on the horizon, another ship appears. It moves quickly, purposefully. As it gets closer, it becomes clear this is not a friendly vessel. These are Cilician pirates, the terror of these seas, and they have just found their next prize. The takeover is swift. There's no grand battle, just the quiet understanding that the journey is over. The pirates swarm the deck, rough men with sun-weathered skin, and the hard eyes of those who live by taking what isn't theirs. The air fills with the smell of unwashed bodies and the sharp tang of cheap wine on their breath. Caesar and his small entourage are now prisoners. The pirates, pleased with their high-status captive, set a ransom. 20 talents of silver, a huge sum of money, enough to make them all rich. They present this demand to their prisoner, probably expecting him to be terrified, to beg. Instead, Caesar laughs, a genuine, amused laugh. He looks at them, these hardened sea bandits, and tells them that 20 talents is an insultingly low number. He informs them that a man of his stature is worth at least 50 talents, and they should demand a proper price for him. It's the kind of self-appraisal most of us only attempt on our LinkedIn profiles. But Caesar did it with pirates. To their faces, the pirates are confused. This is not standard hostage behavior. This young man is negotiating his own ransom, upwards. But being pirates, they are not ones to turn down more money. So they agree. 50 talents it is. They send most of Caesar's companions off to the nearest cities to raise the funds, a process that will take over a month. And so, for the next 38 days, Caesar becomes the pirates' guest. It's hard to call him a prisoner, given his behavior. He treats his captors not like fearsome criminals, but like an incompetent staff that he has been burdened with. He joins in their games and exercises, always as their superior, effortlessly beating them at whatever they attempt. He writes poetry and speeches, which were probably not very good, and then recites them to the pirates with great dramatic flair. When they don't seem impressed enough, when their applause is lackluster, he calls them illiterate barbarians who can't appreciate true art. When he wants to sleep, he sends word to the pirates that they need to be quiet. He demands their silence, as if they are noisy neighbors in the apartment next door instead of his armed guards. And they obey. They actually quiet down so the fancy Roman boy can get his rest. And through it all, he maintains a running joke. A very specific, very cheerful joke. He tells them over and over, with a smile, that as soon as his ransom is paid and he is free, he will come back, hunt them all down, and have every last one of them crucified. The pirates think this is hilarious. They grow to like this strange, arrogant Roman. His threats are just part of his bizarre charm. They laugh and clap him on the back. What a character. This kid will go far. Eventually, the 50 talents arrive. The pirates, true to their word, release him. They probably wave goodbye, telling him to look them up if he's ever in the neighborhood again. Maybe share a drink for old time's sake. Caesar was not joking. As soon as he is free, he doesn't just go back to his original plan of attending speech school. He goes to the port city of Miletus, and despite holding no official office, raises a small fleet of ships. He was a private citizen, but he possessed a force of character that made people do his bidding. He sails straight back to the island where the pirates were still anchored, likely busy counting their new fortune and telling stories about their weird, bossy hostage. He captures them all, swiftly and efficiently. He also takes back his 50 talents, plus all of their plunder. He takes his prisoners to the nearby city of Pergamon and hands them over to the local Roman governor, Marcus Junius Juncus, demanding their execution. But the governor is a typical bureaucrat. He's more interested in the potential profit from selling the pirates as slaves. And he tells Caesar he'll get around to it. He'll form a committee. He'll look into it. He sends a memo. This response reveals something deep about Caesar's character. He has appealed to the proper authority, the established system, and the system is too slow, too weak, too self-interested. So, Caesar simply bypasses it. He goes to the prison himself and, on his own authority, which is to say, with no authority at all, he has all the pirates taken out and crucified. In a small, strange act of what he might have considered mercy, a final nod to their time together, he has their throats cut first to spare them a long, agonizing death. This whole episode becomes the first great story of his career. It's the origin story he crafts for himself. It's not just about revenge, it's about setting his own value. He decided he was worth 50 talents, and he made the world pay it. He demonstrated that when the rules and the system got in his way, he would simply make his own. It was a lesson he would apply on a much, much larger scale for the rest of his life. Let's leave the salty air of the Aegean and travel to the heart of the world, to Rome. The air here is different. It's thick with the smells of 1 million people. The scent of wood smoke from countless cooking fires, the sharp tang of wine from taverns, the earthy smell of olive oil, and the ever-present dust kicked up by thousands of sandals on stone. There's the smell of fresh bread from bakeries, but also the less pleasant odours of a city at work, the faint, rank smell of the sewers and the sweat of the crowds. The sounds are a constant, low hum, the murmur of merchants haggling in the forum, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the chatter of a dozen different languages, the rumble of wooden carts on uneven roads. This is the centre of power, and it is noisy and alive. It is now around 60 BCE. Caesar has returned to the city. He's a rising star, a military hero from his time as governor in Spain. But he is also famously, deeply in debt. In Rome, ambition required money, and Caesar's ambition was limitless. He spent lavishly on public games, on bribes, on gifts, on everything. He understood that in Rome, you had to spend money to make power. The Roman Republic was, in theory, a government of laws and institutions run by the Senate. In reality, it was a brutal arena for powerful men. And at this moment, there were two men who stood above all others. First, there was Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great. He was the ultimate military rock star, the most celebrated general of his time. He had just returned from a series of spectacular victories in the East. The people loved him. He was the hero of the hour. But the Senate, the old guard of wealthy aristocrats, was wary of him. They feared his popularity. They saw him as an upstart. So when Pompey asked them to approve something very reasonable, land grants for his loyal, retired soldiers, they stonewalled him. They left him in a state of political limbo, a hero with nothing to show for it, fuming in his villa. The second man was Marcus Licinius Crassus. Crassus was, quite simply, the richest man in Rome, perhaps one of the richest men in history. His wealth was legendary. He owned vast tracts of the city. He even had his own private fire brigade, who would rush to a burning building, and then, as the flames licked the walls, Crassus would offer to buy the property from the desperate owner for a pittance. If they agreed, his men would put out the fire. If not, well, they'd let it burn. But what he had in money, he lacked in respect. He craved the one thing he couldn't buy, military glory, and he nursed a bitter grudge against Pompey. Years earlier, Crassus had done the hard work of putting down the famous slave rebellion led by Spartacus. But at the last minute, Pompey had shown up, mopped up a few survivors, and then tried to steal the credit. Crassus never forgave him for it. So you have Pompey, the popular general who can't get anything done, and you have Crassus, the money man who despises the popular general. They are bitter rivals, circling each other like wary predators. And into this standoff walks Julius Caesar. Caesar is the one who sees what nobody else does. He understands that these two powerful, stubborn men who hate each other's guts could achieve far more together than they ever could apart. He approaches them, not in the open Senate, but in private, in the quiet of their homes, away from the prying eyes of their rivals. He brokers a secret deal. This was not an official political party. It was a secret handshake agreement, an informal alliance that historians would later call the First Triumvirate, a three-headed monster, as their opponents called it. It was, essentially, a private takeover of the Roman state. The deal was simple. Crassus would provide the money. Pompey would provide the military muscle and popular support. And Caesar would provide the political genius and the nerve. Together, they would push through each other's agendas, bypassing the Senate and its traditions entirely. It was a brilliant, cynical hack of the entire republican system. They didn't need to overthrow the government if they could simply control it from behind the scenes. Pompey would get the land for his veterans. Crassus would get the political appointments and financial deals he wanted. And Caesar would get the prize he coveted most, the consulship, the highest office in Rome, to be followed by a prestigious, long-term military command in Gaul. To seal this very transactional deal, Caesar made a deeply personal move. He gave his only child, his beloved daughter Julia, in marriage to Pompey, a man much older than her. This marriage was the human glue holding the fragile alliance of egos together. By all accounts, it became a genuinely happy marriage. Julia was charming and intelligent, and Pompey, the great general, was utterly devoted to her. For a time, it worked perfectly. They were unstoppable. Caesar became consul, and using a mix of bribery, intimidation, and brilliant political maneuvering, he fulfilled all of his promises to his partners. His co-consul, a man named Bibulus, tried to oppose him, but Caesar's hired thugs dumped a bucket of dung on his head in the middle of the forum. After that, Bibulus simply stayed home, effectively leaving Caesar to rule as sole consul. The Romans, with their dry wit, joked that the year was the consulship of Julius and Caesar. But an alliance built on pure, naked ambition is an unstable thing. It was a partnership of three men who each believed they should be the one in charge. And as long as all three were balanced, the monster could stand. But if one of them were to fall, the other two would be left facing each other, with nothing in between them but their own immense, dangerous pride. Having secured his political future, Caesar leaves the noise and the heat of Rome behind. He travels north to his new command, to a land the Romans called Gaul, a vast, wild territory of deep forests, misty rivers, and hundreds of warring tribes. Today, we know it as France. Imagine the change in the senses. The air is cool and damp, smelling of wet earth and pine needles. The constant hum of the city is replaced by a different set of sounds. The rhythmic tramp of thousands of sandals on a muddy track, the soft jingle of armor, the creak of leather straps, the low commands of a centurion, and at night, the crackle of 1,000 small campfires under a vast, dark sky. For nearly 10 years, this would be Caesar's world. This was no simple tour of duty. It was a relentless, brutal campaign of conquest. But for our sleepy story, we will focus not on the battles, but on the quiet moments in between, on the life of the camp. Every single night, on the march, his legions would build a new, fully fortified camp. It was a marvel of engineering and discipline, the sound of 10,000 men working in unison, the thud of axes felling trees for a palisade, the scrape of shovels digging a defensive ditch. Inside these temporary walls, a city would spring up, tents of leather or canvas laid out in a perfect grid, the smell of porridge and bacon cooking over open fires, the murmur of men cleaning their gear, playing games of chance, writing letters home. For a Roman soldier, this camp was a portable piece of home, a walled city they carried with them. It was safety and order in the middle of a hostile wilderness. The daily routine was relentless. A horn call at dawn, morning muster where every soldier was inspected, then drills, endless drills, marching in formation, practicing with heavy wooden swords against a post, building and rebuilding fortifications. It was designed to instill a discipline so deep it became instinct. And at the center of this world was Caesar. He was not a general who commanded from a luxurious tent far from the front lines. He was known for sharing the hardships of his men. He marched with them, often on foot, his head bare in the sun and rain. He ate the same simple food, mostly wheat porridge with a little bacon or cheese. He slept under the same cold stars. He had a remarkable memory for names and would call out individual soldiers in his dispatches, praising their bravery. There's a story of a time when his legions were terrified to face a massive army of Germans. Rumors spread through the camp of their size, their ferocity. The Roman soldiers, even the veterans, were on the verge of mutiny. Caesar called an assembly. He told them that if they were too afraid to fight, they could all go home. He would go on alone, he said, with only his favorite 10th Legion, because he knew they would never desert him. The shame was immediate and profound. The other legions begged him to lead them, desperate to prove their courage. The men of the 10th Legion swelled with pride. He knew his men. He knew how to speak to their hearts, to their pride, to their loyalty. This created an extraordinary bond, a loyalty that was deeper than duty. Many of his soldiers weren't even full Roman citizens. They were men from the northern parts of Italy, from places Rome considered provincial. Their allegiance wasn't to the abstract idea of the Senate and people of Rome. It was to this man, the man who led them, who knew their names, who shared their struggles, and who, most importantly, led them to victory after victory, promising them glory and a comfortable retirement. They were not the army of the Republic. They were becoming Caesar's army. And while he was leading this army, Caesar was also waging a different kind of campaign. He was writing. He kept a detailed account of his wars, sending his commentaries back to Rome in installments. These weren't just dry military reports. They were masterpieces of propaganda, written in clean, simple Latin that everyone could understand. You can imagine them being read aloud in the forum in Rome. For the people back home, it was like listening to a thrilling, serialized podcast from the front lines. Each new chapter brought news of heroic victories against savage tribes, of daring river crossings and brilliant sieges. And at the center of every story was the calm, decisive, and brilliant protagonist, Caesar himself. He was carefully crafting his own legend, winning the hearts and minds of the Roman people from hundreds of miles away. The years in Gaul transformed him. He went in as a politician in debt. He came out as the most powerful, experienced, and wealthy general in Roman history, and he commanded a hardened veteran army that was loyal to him and him alone. The final great battle of the Gallic Wars, the siege of Alesia, was his masterpiece. He trapped the entire Gallic army, led by the charismatic chieftain Vercingetorix, inside their fortress. And then, when a massive Gallic relief army arrived, an army that vastly outnumbered his own, he simply built a second wall around his own army. He was besieging and being besieged at the same time. It was an act of supreme confidence and breathtaking engineering. 20 miles of fortifications, complete with trenches, watchtowers, and hidden traps, built in a matter of weeks. Imagine being a soldier there. The constant work, the digging, the building. The tension of knowing you were trapped between two massive enemy forces. The sounds of the enemy on both sides, their war cries echoing in the valley. And in the middle of it all, the quiet confidence of your general moving among you, overseeing the work, his presence a constant reassurance. And it worked. The Gallic armies were defeated, and Vercingetorix surrendered in a dramatic ceremony, laying his weapons at Caesar's feet. After a decade of cold and mud and struggle, Gaul was conquered. And Caesar, along with his fiercely loyal army, was ready to come home. But the Rome he was returning to had changed, and the stage was being set for a final, terrible confrontation. The political supergroup in Rome had, predictably, fallen apart. The personal glue, Caesar's daughter Julia, had died tragically in childbirth. Her death was a deep personal blow to both Caesar and Pompey, and it severed the most important human link between them. The balancing member, Crassus, in his desperate quest for military glory, had gotten himself and his entire army annihilated in the deserts of the east. The Parthians had reportedly poured molten gold down his throat, a grimly symbolic end for the richest man in Rome. All that was left were the two rivals, Caesar and Pompey. The Senate, fearing Caesar's power, sided with Pompey. They declared Caesar an enemy of the state and ordered him to disband his army. For Caesar, this was an impossible choice. To obey would mean returning to Rome as a private citizen, where his political enemies would surely destroy him with lawsuits and trumped-up charges. So he made a different choice. On a cold January day in 49 BCE, he led one of his legions across a small river called the Rubicon, the legal boundary of his province. It was an act of treason, an act of war. As he stood on the bank, he's said to have hesitated, and then uttered the famous words, "The die is cast." The civil war that followed was swift. Pompey, for all his fame, was outmaneuvered. He fled from Italy to Greece, and then, after a decisive defeat at the Battle of Pharsalus, he fled to the one place he thought he would be safe, Egypt. And so, our story shifts again. From the cool forests of Gaul to the hot, dry air of Alexandria, a city of ancient wonders, of colossal stone buildings and the scent of exotic spices and Nile river mud. The city was a grid of wide streets, suitable for chariots, and at its heart was the great library, a beacon of knowledge for the entire world. Caesar, now in his early 50s, arrives in hot pursuit, but he's too late. The rulers of Egypt, the teenage pharaoh Ptolemy XIII and his advisors, thought they could win Caesar's favor. When Pompey landed, they had him killed. And as a welcome gift for Caesar, they presented him with the severed head of his great rival. This was a profound miscalculation. Caesar was horrified and disgusted. Pompey was his enemy, yes, but he was also a Roman consul and the former husband of his beloved daughter. This was no way for a Roman to die. He wept, not for the loss of his enemy, but for the loss of a great Roman. Caesar lands in Alexandria and finds himself walking into the middle of a deeply dysfunctional family drama. The young pharaoh Ptolemy is at war with his older sister, who is also his wife, as was the custom. Her name is Cleopatra. She is only 21 years old, and she has been driven out of the capital by her brother's faction. But she is brilliant, ambitious, and fluent in 9 languages, and she knows this powerful Roman is her only chance to regain her throne. She arranges a meeting that is pure theatre. Knowing she cannot get into the palace through normal channels, she has herself rolled up in a carpet, or perhaps a large linen sack, and smuggled into Caesar's private quarters by a loyal servant. Imagine the scene. The servant unrolls the bundle, and out comes the young queen of Egypt. It was a meeting of 2 of the sharpest political minds of their time. This wasn't just a romance. It was a strategic alliance. Caesar needed Cleopatra's immense wealth to pay for his armies. Cleopatra needed Caesar's military power to make her queen. But by all accounts, there was also a genuine connection, a spark between the 52-year-old Roman general and the 21-year-old Egyptian queen. Suetonius would later write that she was his most passionate love affair. Caesar sided with her, defeated her brother's army in the fierce battle of the Nile and placed her securely on the throne of Egypt. They celebrated their new partnership with a luxurious, month-long cruise down the Nile on a magnificent royal barge, accompanied by 400 ships. It was a floating palace, a journey through an ancient and wondrous land. And during this time, Cleopatra became pregnant with Caesar's child, a boy they would call Caesarion, or Little Caesar. Eventually, Caesar had to return to Rome. He left Cleopatra to rule Egypt and arrived back in the capital as the undisputed master of the Roman world. He was made dictator, at first for 10 years and then for life. And now, with all the power in the world, he turned his attention to a project that was both incredibly ambitious and deeply, wonderfully nerdy. He decided to fix the calendar. The old Roman calendar was, to put it mildly, a complete mess. It was a lunar calendar, which meant it was about 10 1/4 days shorter than the actual solar year. Over time, the official calendar drifted wildly out of sync with the seasons. Winter festivals might be happening in the heat of summer. It was also ripe for political abuse. Priests could add or subtract days to make a politician's term in office longer or shorter. Caesar, consulting with the best astronomers from Alexandria, decided to fix it once and for all. He introduced the Julian calendar, a solar calendar of 365 days, with an extra day added every 4 years. A leap day, the system we still basically use today. But to get the calendar back on track, he had to make a one-time adjustment. The year 46 BCE, the year of the transition, had to be 445 days long. It became known as the Year of Confusion. It seems like a small, administrative thing, but it was a profound statement of power. In the ancient world, controlling the calendar meant controlling the rhythm of life itself. By taking time out of the hands of priests and politicians and putting it on a rational, scientific footing, Caesar was quietly declaring that a new order had arrived. Even time itself now operated under his authority. Caesar was now at the absolute height of his power. He was dictator for life. His image was the first of a living Roman to be placed on a coin. He embarked on a series of popular reforms, offering land to his veterans and jobs to the poor, rebuilding cities and extending citizenship to people in the provinces. He seemed untouchable. But in the quiet halls of the Senate, resentment was growing. Many senators, men from old, proud families, saw his power not as a solution to Rome's problems, but as the problem itself. They whispered that he wanted to be a king, a title that Romans had despised for centuries. The conspiracy against him involved more than 60 men, a mix of his old enemies, whom he had mercifully pardoned, and former friends who now feared his ambition. The story of his final day is shrouded in a kind of dreamlike dread. The omens were all bad. The night before, his wife, Calpurnia, had a terrible dream. She saw their house collapsing, and she dreamt that she was holding Caesar's body in her arms, stabbed and bleeding. She begged him not to go to the Senate meeting that day. Even the animals seemed to know. The herds of horses that Caesar had dedicated and set free near the Rubicon River reportedly refused to eat and wept copious tears. A small bird, a kingbird, flew into the hall where the Senate met, carrying a laurel sprig. It was immediately set upon and torn to pieces by a flock of other birds. Caesar was a man who took risks, but he was also superstitious. He hesitated, but one of the conspirators, a man he thought was a friend, Decimus Brutus, came to his house and shamed him into going, telling him the Senate was waiting to honor him, and that he shouldn't let a woman's dreams dictate the business of state. So he went. On his way to the meeting, a soothsayer named Spurina, who had warned him weeks before to beware the Ides of March, saw him in the crowd. Caesar, feeling confident, called out to him with a laugh, "The Ides of March have come." The soothsayer's reply was quiet and chilling. "Yes," he said, "they have come, but they have not yet gone." He entered the Senate meeting, held in a hall next to a theatre built by his great rival, Pompey. As he sat down in his chair, the conspirators crowded around him, pretending they had a petition for him to read. One of them, Tilius Cimber, grabbed his toga and pulled it from his shoulders. It was the signal. The first blow came from a senator named Casca. He struck from behind, but his hand was shaking, and the dagger only grazed Caesar's neck. Caesar was a soldier. His reaction was instant. He spun around, cried out, "Why? This is violence," and stabbed Casca's arm with his stylus, the sharp metal pen he used for writing. For a moment he fought back, but then he saw them all. A circle of men, his colleagues, his friends, his pardoned enemies, all with daggers drawn. He realized there was no escape. And then he saw him, Marcus Junius Brutus, a man he had favored, promoted, and loved like a son, the son of his longtime mistress, Servilia. When he saw Brutus with his dagger raised, something in Caesar broke. He stopped fighting. According to some, he uttered in Greek, "You too, my child." But the most common account says he uttered only a single, soft groan at the first true blow and then fell silent. He pulled his toga up over his head, unwilling to look upon the faces of his betrayers. And with his other hand, he reached down and arranged the bottom of his toga to cover his legs, so that he might fall with dignity. He was stabbed 23 times. He collapsed and died at the foot of a large statue of Pompey the Great. The assassins believed they had saved the Republic. They thought that by killing the man, they could kill the idea of absolute power. But they were wrong. They had not saved the Republic. They had only guaranteed its final, violent death. Caesar's death did not restore the old ways. It created a power vacuum that led to more than a decade of brutal civil war. And when the dust finally settled, one man stood supreme. Not a dictator for life, but something new, something permanent. Caesar's own grandnephew and adopted heir, Octavian, would become Augustus, the first Roman emperor. The conspirators, in their desperate act to prevent a king, had only paved the way for an empire. But for now, in the quiet hall of Pompey, there is only silence. The great man lies still. The fire beside you continues to crackle softly, its gentle warmth a comfort in the dark. There is nothing more to the story tonight. Only peace. Only rest. Allow the last embers of the tale to fade, like the last embers of the fire, and sleep.